for Progress and how we can support Black resilience on a journey to equality. We are so privileged to be taught in the coming hour by a noted oral historian and educator, Zaheer Ali. So in the chat, I'm going to post a bio highlighting Teacher Ali's absolutely impressive credentials, but I have to call out two of them. One is founding the Hutchins Institute for Social Justice at Lawrenceville, New Jersey's famed high school, but also speaking as a Brooklynite, the absolutely amazing Muslims in Brooklyn Art and History project that you did for the Brooklyn Historical Society. So Mr. Ali, Educator Ali, is then going to be joined in a discussion with our own resident expert in diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, Janice Aurora, who is our Department of Commerce's Chief Diversity Officer. So like all of you, I am here to learn from the two of them. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Amina.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those insightful remarks. Now I would like to take a moment to introduce our guest speaker. Before I do that, I wanted to take a moment to just say when we were planning for this event and the theme was brought to our attention about Black resilience and the journey to equality, I immediately thought about Zaheer, and I was just like, say less, I have the perfect speaker in mind. So with that, I just wanted to give a brief introduction and about our speaker today. Zaheer Ali is an educator and oral historian with more than a decade of experience directing nationally recognized public history and cultural heritage initiatives. He is currently the inaugural executive director of the Hutchins Institute for Social Justice at the Lawrenceville School, as we mentioned, which is an innovative secondary school initiative supporting social justice, teaching, and practice through scholarship, programming, and experiential learning. In 2020, he was Senior Fellow of the Pillars Fund, Muslim Narrative Change cohort, and a recipient of the Open Society Foundation Soros Equality Fellowship for his work on leveraging the power of storytelling and listening for social change. Formerly, he was the project manager of Columbia University's Malcolm X Project, and his oral history interviews informed the late Manning Marable's Pulitzer Prize-winning biography, Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention. He serves on the National Council of the Oral History Association, the principal membership organization for oral history practitioners, on the advisory board of SEEing, a journal of film and visual culture focused on Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, and on the advisory board of the University of Georgia's History in the Headline series. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree with a concentration in Afro-American Studies from Harvard University and Master of Arts and Master of Philosophy degrees in history from Columbia University. There's more to read in the chat and on his bio, but without further ado, I introduce to you our guest speaker today, Mr. Zaheer Ali.
Thank you so much, Amina, and thank you so much, Undersecretary Largo, for your welcome and introduction. Thank you to the members of BMOLD and the organizers of this event. I'm looking forward to our conversation titled King's Letter from Birmingham Jail, Let Us Be Coworkers for Progress. Before we start, so this is going to be a little interactive, and as a little warm-up activity, I wanted you all to engage in some polling. So there are various ways for you to do this. So we're going to do like a word cloud for you to type in where you are viewing from. You can either to log on to the polling feature, because there'll be several questions throughout this presentation. You can text my name's Zaheer Ali to the number 37607, or you can go to your computer if you're on or on your browser at pollev.com/Zaheer Ali. And I'll bring that back to you, or you can use this QR code. And so I'm going to leave the QR code up for a few seconds for those of you who can use that with your phone. Of course, direct your phone's camera to the QR code, which will automatically pull up the link to the website where you can begin participating in the series of polls that will be part of this interactive presentation. So I'm going to give you like another few seconds, and I'll go back to the poll, and we'll see what people's responses will be. This is just sort of a warm-up activity to make sure that people, oh, here we go. Y'all are doing it. Okay. Again, if you didn't get the QR code, you can access through your browser or by texting. We're looking at like about 41 results so far. Let's see how far we can go for another few seconds, and then we'll dive right into our conversation. Washington is very well represented. Silver Spring, Maryland, the DMV. So I grew up in the DMV area, so it's good to see folks from the DMV. I saw Minneapolis. I'm a huge Prince fan, so always happy to see Minneapolis represented. Alaska, okay. So this is great. I'm so happy to be able to speak to all of you in all of your locations, and I look forward to this conversation. All right, so it looks like folks got the hang of it with the polling feature. So now we're going to move on to the next slide, which is letting you know what the agenda is for this presentation. I will provide a little bit of a historical context for King's letter from Birmingham Jail. We'll explore some of the main ideas and themes found in that letter, which introduces a dialectical definition for coworkers for progress, and also pose some questions. So let's start with this first one. Now that you all have the hang of the polling, who was Martin Luther King Jr.? What word comes to mind when you think of Martin Luther King Jr.? And for the people, just in case you need that QR code again, here's the QR code. I'll have it up for a few seconds. All right, let's see what you all are coming up with. Let's see, leader, champion, justice, revolutionary, visionary, pioneer. Okay. All right. We're at like 50, 60 results. Let's see how far we can get. Disruptive. Okay. Courage. Peacemaker. Powerful. Visionary. Freedom. Advocate. Activist. Pioneer. Pastor. All right. Let's get a few more in. Inspiration. Okay. I love the interaction. I love that people are engaging, that you're responding. Part of this call and response tradition is hard when you're doing a virtual presentation, for us to not be in the same room that you can like hear and feel the audience. So this is the next best thing. Okay. So these are great. I'm going to move on to the next slide, but hopefully you'll keep thinking about words that you would add on to this question of like what word comes to mind. One of the words that no one said was pool shark. So this is one of my favorite pictures of Dr. King, because I think so many of us have a very limited dimensional view of him as an icon, as a leader, and we often think of him in the context of a demonstration, of a protest, of a speech. And sometimes when we do that, we make these leaders somewhat superhuman. And in doing that, we sort of expect them to do all of the work for us. And, you know, like they have it handled. The other thing that I like about this is that this reminds us that Dr. King practiced joy as part of his freedom work. And so thinking about your theme of Black resilience, so often when we think of Black history, we think of struggle, and certainly struggle is part of it. But when we think of struggle, we should think of the joy and the community and the creativity and the love that is very much part of the community building work that's needed for this structural engagement. Maybe some people said scholar. These are my two other favorite pictures of Dr. King, showing him as a student, as someone who is working with ideas, who is a philosopher. We know him as an accomplished orator and writer, but he is someone who thought deeply about the ideas that informed the work that he did. And those ideas show up in the letter from Birmingham Jail. Another word is, we could say, messy. His desk definitely looks like mine when I'm in the midst of working on something, and probably many of you as well. Another thing that I think people sometimes don't think about is unpopular. Because of time, I think we have come to understand King's work and come to appreciate his work. But it's important to remember that contemporary to him during his time, he was not always popularly received. In fact, in May 1963, just a month after he penned a letter from Birmingham Jail, his favorable ratings were just slightly higher than his unfavorable ratings. And so this is really important for us to keep mindful of, that, you know, our reimagination of King and the civil rights movement is sometimes where we think it was something, and he was someone who was embraced by all at the time, but that was not always the case. And that brings us to the history that we're going to explore, which is the Birmingham campaign in 1963. On April 3rd, organizers launched a desegregation campaign that included mass meetings, direct actions, lunch counter sit-ins, marches, and boycotts. And they were targeting the discriminatory practices by businesses in downtown Birmingham. And 2 days prior, Alabama courts had issued an injunction against the protests. On April 12th, Good Friday, King was arrested. And at the time, the day of his arrest, members of the white members of some of the clergy in Alabama issued a statement called A Call for Unity, where in the local paper they said they were strongly urging our own Negro community to withdraw support from these demonstrations. While King read these comments, he began jotting down his response on the margins of the newspaper. And his aides, as they visited him, smuggled in paper so he could finish his thoughts that would become the letter from Birmingham Jail. The New York Times declined to publish it, and the Atlantic Monthly did publish it in August of that year under the title, "The Negro is Your Brother." And this, of course, August 1963 is the same month as the now historic March on Washington. The title for my talk comes from a passage in the letter where King says, "Human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation." So King understood that this is not something we could just sit back and expect to happen. It is not inevitable. It requires co-workers for progress. You'll see that my presentation is both textual and visual. It is designed to bring King's ideas into conversation with images from the demonstrations that we've seen in the last few years, primarily around police killings of Black men and women. And so it is designed to see how King speaks to our moment. But it's also understanding that King's letter was in response to a statement by the clergy. The clergy statement was 442 words. King's letter was 7,000 words. And so even with that balance or imbalance, King spoke very thoroughly to the issues that the clergy raised. And so we were going to explore some of the statements of the clergy, and we'll explore what King's response was to clergy and setting up this dialectic. And in the backdrop, you'll see images of recent protests. So we're going to go back to the polling. The first question is, what defines our vision of justice? And this is forcing a binary. I know people want to say both, but I want you to, if you were forced to choose one, which one would you choose? What defines our vision of justice? And our can be your personally, our society, or whoever you want to conceive our to be. What defines our vision of justice? So I'm going to give a few more seconds. Thank you for those who are responding. I love the interactivity. And it looks like a good body, a good distribution of answers are coming through. I'll give a few more seconds. Okay, so let's see what the clergy thought of this question in their statement to King. In their statement to King, the clergy said, "We expressed understanding that honest convictions in racial matters could be properly pursued in the court." So they landed on the legal codes. King's response was, "One has the moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws." Of course, he is powerfully drawing on the notion of inalienable rights and the social contract outlined in the Declaration of Independence. He frames a reminder that laws are not the source, but the codification of a shared moral commitment to justice. And so he wanted to say that by confining our scope of our vision for justice exclusively to questions of legality, as the clergy did, we are missing a whole range of ways that racial injustice plays out in extra legal practices, through policies, through culture, through customs, through standards, and through norms. And so this is the first dialectical framework that King introduces to us in his letter, and that is over the scope of vision. On the one end, legal code, on the other end, moral imagination. And this now brings us to the second. So we got a second question for you. Our work advances justice on an individual or a systemic level? I'm going to see we get to like 60 or 70 before we move on. Okay. Here's what the clergy said. "We are now confronted by a series of demonstrations by some of our Negro citizens, directed and led in part by outsiders." So this was a very common charge made against civil rights organizers, that during King's time and during our time, that these protests originate out of the work of outside agitators. They sought to undermine the legitimacy and representativeness of the demonstrations that were happening in Birmingham. And they emphasized that the protests were directed and led in part by outsiders. This atomization of the social justice movement that seeks to disconnect it from people throughout different locations and communities obscures patterns of injustice that reveal the deep systemic and structural causes of these inequities. And so King, in one of his most famous passages, says, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an escapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment." King response says, he was like, "I am going to be wherever injustice is." And this is true today, whether in Birmingham or Minneapolis, Georgia or Kentucky, or Memphis in 1963 or 2020 or 2021, a thing that sociologists call linked fate binds us and our communities together, prompting us to seek justice on a scale that is broader and deeper than any one individual. So this is the second dialectic of individual versus systemic. Those of us who want to be coworkers or progress, thinking about where we locate and focus our energy. All right, next one. Discomfort should be avoided or engaged. No, oh, I like that no one's saying avoided. But I wonder if I said in practice, how much of us actually do engage discomfort versus avoid it? Can we get some votes to like, hey, thank you. I see a little movement in the avoided. Yes, some of us, even though we want to engage discomfort, sometimes we know out of practical considerations, we might need to avoid it. So it's okay. It's okay. These are provocations, right? These are not accusations or judgment. This is just getting us to think. And so, of course, the clergy wanted to avoid discomfort, right? They were saying, we further strongly urge our own Negro community to withdraw support from these demonstrations. When rights are consistently denied, a cause should be pressed in the courts and negotiations among local leaders and not in the streets. We appeal to both our white and Negro citizenry to observe the principles of law and order and common sense. So law and order and common sense. And King, his response was, I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. So what King is doing here, he is saying that it is justice that should be the measure of whether peace, a real peace, has been achieved, right? Not order. Like if you go by order, if you define peace in terms of order, then you look at if something is orderly or disruptive. If it's orderly, it's peaceful. If it's disruptive, it's not peaceful. But if you define peace according to the presence of justice, then you have a very different measure. And so that is the next dialectic that we've had. We've had scope of vision, we've had scale of concern, and now we have tactics. Are tactics orderly or disruptive? And now we have our final question. The pace of change should be gradual or immediate. And I know that we would like to say both, but I'm forcing you to choose one, again, to provoke conversation around these dialectics, which admittedly are on a spectrum that we are not fixed on, but move from side to side. So we got a lot of gradual and then got some immediate. Okay, so we're at 70. So we're going to move to what the clergy said. We recognize the natural impatience of people who feel that their hopes are slow in being realized, but we are convinced that these demonstrations are unwise and timely. And King said, frankly, we have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. So this is the one that, like, people are like, I'm down with moral imagination. I'm down with systemic change. I'm even down with some disruption. But immediate change is a little difficult to imagine. And so, um, you know, it's okay, right? Like it really is okay. Because this again is a provocation. And I think, but it's important for us to be true to when we're talking about King and the clergy, that the clergy's end of the spectrum was a focus on the legal code, a focus on individual solutions that are achieved through orderly means and that are gradual, that reflect gradual change. King grounded his work in the moral imagination that was beyond what had been legally codified, focused on systemic change that meant that it involved and encompassed everyone, and that it was something that everyone had to be involved in. Change that could be disruptive. Of course, his most strongest commitment as a tactician was to civil disobedience, nonviolent civil disobedience. And then finally, immediate, that there needed to be some signs of immediate change. And so this is the dialectic, and that is introduced in King's letter. And this dialectic, I think, is a good framework for us to think about. Like, and again, it isn't a judgment. It's like we should always be on our toes when we are advancing solutions as coworkers for progress. Where are solutions on this spectrum? Where are they floating on the spectrum? And so here's some questions that we might want to consider as coworkers for progress. What is the scope of our vision for justice? What is the scale of our approach? How aligned with our existing systems is our work? And what is our timeline for change? So as we read King's words and reflect on our vision of justice, our own networks of mutuality, how we sit and engage discomfort, how we sit with and engage discomfort, and our sense of urgency for what is needed, let us think about how we might be co-workers for progress, for something that is bigger than ourselves and our current moment. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you for your attention. And I look forward to the conversations that we can have in the remaining time, and the conversations I hope that you continue to have as you engage in the work of being co-workers for progress.
Wow, wow. Thank you, Zaire, for that very insightful and informative presentation. I know we're going to have plenty of questions in the chat, and we will get to all of that. Um, unless we were taking a moment now, Monique, I believe I'm just going to go straight into introducing into this conversation someone who has responsibility for helping the Department of Commerce become a co-worker for progress, Mr. Junish Arora. Junish is the department's Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. In that capacity, he promotes DEIA in the department's externally focused mission areas of service delivery, including supporting outreach to historically underserved communities. He is also responsible for developing and implementing an internal DEIA strategy to fully integrate and sustain DEIA into the agency's workforce. Mr. Aurora received his BA in English from Dartmouth College, his MA in English from the University of Virginia, and his JD from the School of Law at the University of Texas at Austin. He is a member of the District of Columbia Bar. He was also honorably discharged from the U.S. Army Reserves. He is married and has 2 raven-haired angels. His full bio is also posted in the chat. Junish, take it away.
Thank you, Amina. I want to thank you and the ITA DIAC and Be Bold and OCR's Monique Dismukes for inviting me and providing me with the opportunity to offer a few remarks, and of course Undersecretary Lago for her opening to this session. And of course, I want to thank Zaheer Ali for those inspiring, insightful observations and connections to Dr. King's letter to Birmingham and being a co-worker for human progress, a wonderful term of art that is both aspirational and attainable. I think, Zaheer, you did a masterful dissection of Dr. King's letter for Birmingham and made all of us think about it in different ways by offering this dialectic approach. Because here at the Department of Commerce, we're all co-workers and we all want professional progress. It makes me think, why can't we leverage those relationships and that trajectory that seeks to elevate? I think when learning about Dr. King's letter to Birmingham, I was most struck by his belief that all communities were interrelated. As Dr. King wrote, and Zaheer also mentioned this in his presentation, Dr. King wrote, quote, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny." I mean, what beautiful oratory. He continues, "Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." And in the workplace, all employees are interrelated, networked, in mutual dependence, aligned to a single mission or purpose, a linked fate, as Dr. King would say. This is reflected partly in the Department of Commerce Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Strategic Plan, fiscal year 22 to 24. So we have our timeline for our pace of change, particularly in goal area 3, which is to create and promote an organizational culture that is inclusive and supports a sense of belonging. This area of inclusion focuses on retention, career advancement, including professional development and promotion, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility training, and workforce culture. Some of the specific objectives in this area include enhancing employee retention, enhancing career advancement, career development, enhancing and promoting DEI training, monitoring the health of the department's work environment. Lastly, the DOC DEIA strategic plan has a framework to promote safe and inclusive workplaces and address workplace harassment to ensure that we have respectful workplaces and create a culture that doesn't tolerate workplace harassment and discrimination. So, Zaheer, I was just really so impressed by your presentation. Initially, you showed us some pictures of Dr. King, and you talked about how we often think about him as superhuman, and sometimes when we have leaders like that, we assume that they will do the work, and we don't think about our own accountability and the own work that we might do. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? Oh, I think you're muted, Zaheer. Can you all hear Zaheer?
Okay, yes.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, yes. Can you restate the question?
Yeah. You mentioned initially that we often think of Dr. King and other leaders as being superhuman, and we assume they'll do this work for social justice, social progress,
Yes.
and we don't think about our own role and the own work that we might do, our own accountability. Could you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. And this is the challenge with some people call it exemplarity. When you have people who we see as examples, it's like people who we see as exemplary, right? In the work that they've done. And certainly Martin King was exemplary, but then we move to this point where we move from exemplary to exceptional, right? And when we make people exceptional, then we kind of take them out of our sense of part of who we are and what we can do. And so it's really important because, we think of ourselves, most of us, as ordinary people, and because we know how we move in the world. And if we only encounter people like King and others in the extraordinary moments of their lives, then we don't understand how we are also connected to them. And so showing them in these sort of ordinary settings is important. And why that's important is because, this is work that we have to do, right? Like, the passage that introduces the idea of coworker, right?
Yeah.
I like coworker better than, some people say ally, right?
Yeah.
Like, or they like
Mm.
coworkers, like you have to be with me doing the
Yeah.
work, right? Because this is not inevitable. There's nothing,
Yeah.
like some people say the arc of the universe bends towards justice. It bends because people bend it,
Right.
right? And so that I think is the important lesson to when we talk about King, talk about him as a coworker, not as this, a leader. He was that, right? But as a coworker, because when we think of him as a coworker, we are implicating ourselves in the work that he is doing or that we all want to do.
Yeah, and I think that also ties into that other quote that you presented from Dr. King, that the progress isn't on the wheels of inevitability, that time isn't necessarily our ally, that time can be this ally of social stagnation, and that it's really work, it's grit to get to a future that we want. As you were sharing, we might think that there's this teleological arc of progress, and that history will go, right itself. But history is made by us as these co-workers of progress.
Think about like the people, so the March on Washington, about 250,000 people attended the March on Washington. It was a huge demonstration. That's just 250,000 people, right? Like not everybody, some people were just doing whatever they were doing. And imagine the challenge of having to enlist people to join you in the struggle in that moment, right? Where people are like, nah, you got this. Like, King, you have this. And we are in a moment now where not only are we might be looking at contemporary figures to say like they have it. We're relying on history. We're not even relying on living human beings to do the work. We want the history to do the work for us, right? So that we think by just remembering the past, we have done the work, right? And that history is not the ceiling, it's the floor, it's the foundation, right? So we have to remember the history, but we cannot expect the history alone or even the memory of the past alone to move us forward. And I think that is, as a historian, as someone who's like a student of history, like that's really important for us to understand. Like these figure, and like a lot of times I give a presentation on Martin King or Malcolm X, people are like, so what would Martin think? And I'm like, it's those, so what would Jesus do kind of thing. And it's that is a kind of historical ventriloquism where we want people from the past to speak into our moment. And so what moved me to do this presentation in this way is not necessarily think about the answers King has for our moment, but the questions he has for our moment, right? So looking at these historic figures, not to see what because their answers are specific to their historical context, to their moment in time, right? But their questions are timeless, right? So yes, so that's it. We look at the past for the questions we need to ask ourselves today. We have to answer those questions, right? The next generation is going to have to answer those questions. And so that's, I think, part of this is to not rely on history to answer questions that we need to answer, but look at the history for the questions that we need to face.
I think that's so appropriate for a special observance event where we often just look at the history, we look at the past, we think about it in terms of education. We don't think about it in terms of action, in terms about how that historical framework can drive action in the present and into the future that I think we all want in the workplace, in our society. Yeah. So thank you so much. And I want to now leave it. I think we're going to check the chat for some questions, Monique, because we want to make this keep this interactive. And it was such an inspiring presentation and dialogue.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we do have a hand up, so I'm going to allow one of our attendees, Marianne Mouser, to come off mute, to unmute herself. and
Yes,
ask
please
the
join us,
question.
Marianne.
Marianne, are you there? Marianne, there you go. You're unmuted.
Yeah. I am here. I didn't enter a question though.
Okay, your hand is up, Marianne. That's what
Oh,
happened.
I apologize. I'm sorry.
No problem, no problem. Okay, well, I do have two questions from the chat, and
Great.
one of them is just a simple one. Junior, you mentioned something about a timeline. So,
Yes.
is there a link to the timeline that you noted? Is there a link that we can get?
Well, yeah,
Okay.
the DEIA strategic
Okay.
plan for the department is fiscal years 22 to 24. It's on
Yeah.
our website and is readily available. Of
can
course,
put it
it's a living document, and it gets updated regularly. So when the DEIA strategic plans ends in 24, we'll issue a new DEI strategic plan because it is a journey, and we'll continue on this DEIA journey.
Thank you. I will put that in that link to that strategic plan in the chat. I just wanted to make sure I had the right one. So, okay, that is what we're talking about. And then the other question is for you, Zaheer. Can there be progress without disruption?
I think it depends what we think of disruption. I do think that progress, there can be some, yes. I mean, it's on a spectrum, right? There can be progress that is orderly. But disruption doesn't have to be disorderly. Disruption can be creative disruption. Disruption can be thinking outside of the box. Disruption can be challenging, conventional, I call it unwisdom, right? The idea that if our imagination is confined to what we have always done, then maybe we need to shake that up a little bit. And so disruption doesn't necessarily need to be protest. So I was thinking of disruption more broadly. I do think that if we're looking at patterns that are systemic, patterns of discrimination, patterns of injustice, those need to be interrupted. They do need to be disrupted, and they can happen creatively. But I think we should welcome people who are coming with ideas and provocations, right? Like, so we might not be in the position to be the provocateur, but we should be open to the ideas that provoke us to think. Like, I may not always be lined up with it. Most of us, like, the other thing is, like, a lot of us like to think we're Martin King. We're not, and it's okay, right? Like, we're not gonna line up with King on everything. But it's important to hear what he's saying, and it's important to listen to the challenges that are posed by a Martin or a Malcolm or Ella Baker or Fannie Lou Hamer, or even a contemporary moment with Black Lives Matter, and the full spectrum of people who are calling for, the various ways of addressing police killings or any other of our social ills. We don't have to agree with the solutions, but we should really be open to understanding and listening to what people are saying as provocation. It's like, shifting the Overton window, right? Like, if we're only listening to people that we agree with, then we have set ourselves into a box of what is possible. But we have to expand our cone of possibility. Even if we don't go there, it should be important for us to consider what people are challenging us to do. I think of the acronym for this organization of Be Bold. Boldness is disruptive, right? It's not be timid. It's not fall in line. It's not, it's be bold. So that is disruptive. And I think it's important, even if we don't say, like, I'm going to do that, it's important for us to be challenged by it, right? So that's what I think is important.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Zaheer. I think you answered that question very well. And I do have another question for you. So what lessons can we learn from Dr. King and others on not getting burned out doing the work, especially when it feels like constantly pushing against the status quo?
Play pool. No, well, that's the joy, right? Like joy is part of the healing work of engaging in resistance, right? Or engaging in struggle. Um, and think of all of the traditions that are part of the Black freedom movement, the food culture, the music, the embodied ways that people move and dance and sartorial decisions they make and how people do their hair and how they get dressed and how they talk and the rhythm of language and all of that are the things that bring us joy, that make us feel whole, that are restorative. And sometimes you have to rest and sometimes you have to take a break. But that I think is why when we think about the historical Black experience, to think about it holistically. We tend to just kind of get these flashpoints of struggle and only think about confrontation or struggle. I think of the work of like Toni Morrison, who, they always would ask Toni Morrison, like, well, um, you don't really center white people in your stories. And she was like, because I'm focusing on Black communities. Zora Neale Hurston did the same thing. So it's important for us to be balanced, and it's important for us, to make sure we have these moments of joy. But it's also important for us to be vigilant, right? And make sure that when we're doing what people now call self-care, that it's not the kind of self-care that lends itself to indulgence, to the disregard of the very really pressing needs of our communities, right? So there's a balance.
Great, thank you. Now here's another question. It's kind of an interesting question. So, I'm looking at it and trying to understand the spin on it, but you can delve it up, either you, Junish, or Zaire, either one or both. Can you give your opinion on when diversity, equity, and inclusion may not be ideal and tolerance is better suited?
Well, so I think that tolerance is just the coexistence with difference, which maybe that might be all that's possible. But I think the ideal is pluralism, which is engaged difference, which is encountered difference, which is relational difference. Again, the idea of building community. We don't have to be the same to be in community with each other. But one would hope that to be in community with each other is not just to tolerate each other, but to celebrate each other, be in relations with each other, to engage and learn from each other's difference. And I think that's much more than tolerance. And so I do think that's the goal. And I think there are many ways of achieving that. And, strategically, I think that the space that's been created for the work of DEI provides some of that space, but it doesn't need to be limited to that space.
Yeah, I would just add that, to me, tolerance sounds like order, and sounds like what the white clergy at the time were telling Dr. King, in terms of the pace of change, the kinds of tactics, and I think DEIA is much more expressive, is much more connective, imagines a future where we are networked, and we do have a sense of shared fate, and we are all draped by this, as King would say, this garment of destiny.
Thank you, Junish and Zaire. That is going, we have other questions, but for the sake of time, we're not going to be able to get to those other questions right now. I think if you have access to the chat, you may be able to look at the questions, and if you want to put jot something down in the chat, you might be able to do so, or I can actually write the questions down and we can get it back to the individuals later, Zaire. I can shoot those over to you and you can just give me a quick response and I'll shoot it back to the requesters. But I want to now turn this back over to Amina because we will get ready to close it out just to make sure we can do this in a timely manner. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. What did I tell you, everyone? I said they left. I knew we would have the perfect speaker if he was available. I just want to take a moment. You said, we talked about Black resilience, a journey to equality. This journey is a spectrum. As you said, there's no one way or exact direction to get there. It's just a matter of doing the work. And like you said, history is important to understand, but we can't rely on that to do the work. I think that was a very important point. I just want to take a moment to thank you, Zaire and Junish, for that very informative and enlightening discussion and presentation. We will now turn over the program to Mr. Jerry Beat, Director for the Office of Civil Rights, for closing remarks.
Good afternoon, everybody. Zaire, thank you so much for your presentation today. Thank you, Be Bold. Thank you, Monique. Thank you, Junish, our Chief Diversity Officer. I really thought this was an outstanding program. And I want to mention that we are here today delivering this to you through the Office of Civil Rights because of Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement. The name of our office, Office of Civil Rights, born in the 60s. We're still carrying on very fundamental, foundational work today. My favorite quote from him, or not my favorite quote from him from this, but gives us something to think about when we're talking about how quickly can this work be done. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities. And in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty. Wow, is that aspirational? Are we there yet? As a nation, I don't think we are. I don't think we're there just yet. And it might be some time, I'd venture to guess, till we are there. So I want to mention that that special observances are work that we do on a monthly basis, specifically to hold conversations just like this, perhaps to go to some of the tenets of the letter from Birmingham Jail. To the tension is there, perhaps to bring out the tension. We may not be the creators of tension. We're acknowledging what's there to have a fruitful, constructive discussion. And so that is specifically the purpose of special emphasis programs, which would be occurring even if there wasn't the executive order on advancing racial equity and outreach to underserved communities or advancing DEIA in the federal workforce. We would still be doing this work here today, and we will continue to do it because it's foundational. The Office of Civil Rights enforces anti-discrimination laws. And we coordinate these programs. We look at our workforce through the employment cycle by race, ethnicity, sex, and disability. Now this work is complemented by our DEIA work, which is wonderful. And it continues to evolve our work and grow. It's very different than where it started, perhaps in the 60s and 70s, but it's still necessary that we continue to do the work in the Office of Civil Rights, the foundational work, in addition to the DEIA work. So again, thank you for this excellent example, this excellent program of the purpose for special emphasis programs, why this, under the law, we do these things at the Department of Commerce and across the federal government. It's still very important today. So it's a wonderful discussion. So I want to remind everybody that tomorrow also we are having another event for Black History Month, the homage exhibit. It's going to be actually an exhibition and in the Herbert C. Hoover building in the lobby. I encourage everybody, if you're physically in the building, to go in and actually go to the exhibit and to touch these articles and hear the curator there. We're very excited. If you're not in the DC area and you aren't able to go into Herbert C. Hoover Building tomorrow in the morning specifically, we'll be offering an online way for you to see the exhibit as well. The curator will be giving a presentation that'll be a video clip and will be sent out later. And then there are a number of other events, including the event this coming Friday with our Deputy Secretary interviewing the Black Chamber of Commerce as well here at the department. You name it, there are so many different wonderful events to celebrate Black History Month. It's a very exciting thing. In March, we are kicking off Women's History Month. And the theme for the 2023 Women's History Month is celebrating women who tell our stories. And the theme encourages the recognition of women, past and present, who have been active in all forms of media and storytelling, including print, radio, TV, stage, screen blogs, etc. Very excited for that theme. We actually already have a speaker who will be coming in. You'll be getting more information about that through a broadcast. The event will happen on March 29th, and Ina Peterson, who is the founder and CEO of women-led global media and entertainment company Inner Voices Artists, will be here to speak to us then. So I look forward to seeing everybody then. Don't forget to visit OCR's webpage, doc.ocr.gov. I'm sorry, doc.gov/OCR. doc.ocr. I'm getting it all confused. You can.
Hey, I'll put it in the
My
chat for you, Gary.
apologies.
I'll put it in the chat.
You can get to it from the page, the equity page, if you're there. But hopefully, everybody knows how to navigate. We have a list of all our special emphasis programs and other wonderful things for you to be able to join to support and uplift DEIA and equal employment opportunity. So on that note, brings a close to our program. Thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of your day. And we'll see you at a future Black History Month program, the one tomorrow and Friday. Take care.
Thank you. Zaheer, could you stay on for just a minute? And Amina?
Sure.
Okay. And Sharif, are you there? Sharif still here?
I can chat him.
Yes, Mr. Sharif.
Oh, there he is. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending.
And I don't know if the other Be Bold folks are here, but if anybody else on Be Bold is here, I hope they will pop up. Because I just wanted to thank you all myself. Let me turn my camera on. We're all, like everybody's all. Sometimes what I have to do is sometimes after these events, like open up another room. So it'll be like going into the green room. So we can go into the green room after the event is over. and we can just do a little wrap up. And Junish is here too, and Jerry. Yeah, so I just wanted to again thank you all for everything you've done, all your work, everything you did to be here. Zaheer, there were a couple of questions that we didn't get a chance to put up for the audience, but I think they were, it was some simple questions, but I can take and put those up for future reference for the audience. And yeah.
Someone was asking for resources and from where to begin, so that was good.
So
there were some good questions there.
What was it, Amina? What was the one?
I believe someone was asking for resources.
Oh yeah.
So that would be
Yeah.
good. Is it still recording, or do we need to?
Okay,
I have it on both
I'll
my
stop the
computer
recording.
and my phone, so I can't. It's a little delay.
Yeah, thank you for reminding